As we continue in Ecclesiastes, I'm going to continue a kind of a theme or an approach that we looked at last week. I was talking with a Bible teacher recently who commented that he had expressed to him over the years in whatever classes, participants who said they just hated the book of Ecclesiastes. He wasn't teaching the book, and I don't know how that came up. And I wasn't surprised. Either it was too pessimistic or negative for them, or maybe their pride was hurt because they couldn't put it all together. And both of those are things that we have to deal with regard to Ecclesiastes. On the other hand, I've heard people tell me when I teach Ecclesiastes, "Oh, this is my favorite book." And I often wonder why, because most of the material you pick up, and there's things in the book that are negative. These problematic passages, are they just ignoring those and just reading it like Proverbs? And I'm glad they're getting something out of Ecclesiastes. But whatever the case, it's in the canon, and that's my starting point. It's in the canon, and we learn in the New Testament that all Scripture is God-breathed and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, and instruction in righteousness. So I have to approach the book as it's something that God has placed there, and to look for what that is. But it is a problematic book due to some negative interpretation history. It is in need of rescuing and restoring, and actually a lot of scholarship over the last 50 years have contributed to both of these. This is not something I've taken on by myself, and I'm relying totally in parts and bits and pieces on the insights of others. And so I want to, I referred to this last week when we were looking at the concept of the fear of God, but I want to just read this as an example of what I think is not the most helpful way to take the book. And the author says, "What place does this book have in the Bible? Many have asked this question in the light of its pessimism and humanistic sentiments. Primarily," he says, "it acts as a foil or contrast to the other books. It's a brilliant, artful argument for the way one would look at life if God did not play a direct intervening role in life, and if there were no life after death." Now, that's probably example of the most pessimistic that the book is taken. And I'm not interested in just tearing down other views or confronting other views. But this next paragraph, I think, illustrates a mindset that contributes to that perspective. And I want to think through that a little bit this morning in terms of what the book does say and how it says it. He goes on to say, "The book of Ecclesiastes often reads like a diary of despair, sometimes portraying life as a sick joke with death as the punchline, full of what one writer has called cynical wisdom, mostly directing the reader to the meaninglessness of life, yet sometimes urging him to make the most of it, and even in the end, instructing him to fear God and keep his commandments. His journey towards that conclusion is sometimes tortuous as he honestly grapples with the evidence that lies before him under the sun. Yet he never abandons his belief in a sovereign creator God, who in the end is the master of his destiny. The glimpses the author gives us above the sun shine out of the gloom of his materialistic conclusions." Last week, when we looked at the concept of the fear of God, I tried to show you that this was something that occurred earlier in the book, and that was then traced through later on. And that when you really look at the whole place of the fear of God in the Scriptures and in the Proverbs, fear and faith in God are hand in hand. So whenever somebody claims to be wise, that person is claiming to be a God-fearer. And when he says, "I've pursued this by wisdom," which Solomon says in the second chapter, he's saying, "I'm a God-fearer who in the fear of God has considered all this." And so I was showing that this it's negative all the way through till the end, really doesn't hold up. And I want to continue with that kind of perspective today by looking at the refrains. And these are really the key in the book. And so the title for today's thinking is Eat, Drink, and Rejoice. What a refrain. We're familiar with refrains that occur in music. And so this is a refrain that occurs over and over from the very beginning. And we're basically looking still at this middle part that Kohelet, the preacher, concludes that one must still enjoy life as a gift from God. This is not something that he just tacks on at the end of the book. This is something that comes in the beginning and that it is developed and more in a cyclical spiral situation like we suggested before. So what I'm going to do is there's 6 refrains here. I've got each of them up in a slightly abbreviated form. I'm going to read through them, and there's going to be a lot of stuff on this slide when I get finished, but we're not going to work through it in detail. What I want to do is overwhelm you with the way that these refrains carry forth all of the key ideas of the book, and that they start from the beginning, and then we will focus on a couple specifics to wrap up our time today. First of all, in chapter 2, verses 24 to 26, and we've looked at this in some detail, we'll look at this a little further today. He says, "There's nothing better than one should eat and drink and cause his soul to experience good in his labor from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat or enjoy anything? For to the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner, the business of gathering and collecting, only to give to one who pleases God, this also is vaporous and striving after the wind." And I'm going to come back to this later this morning. The second refrain occurs in chapter 3, and it carries on the same ideas. "I know that there is nothing better for them than to rejoice and to do good as long as they live. Also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy good in all his labor. It's the gift of God. I know that whatever God does shall be forever, that men should fear him, and God requires an account," is one way to translate that. The third refrain, and I used to actually consider this a part of the second refrain, just interspersed with a few verses. But I've decided that this is a refrain in its own, though a very abbreviated one, because of something that that Solomon wants to add in his next train of thought. But in 3:22, "Therefore I saw that there is nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his works, for that is his portion, for who can bring him to see what will be after him?" The fourth refrain is in chapter 5, verses 18 to 20. I have seen this to be good and proper, to eat and to drink, and to see the good in all his labor, all the days of his life which God has given him, for this is his portion. Every man to whom God has given riches and wealth and power to eat of it, and to take his portion and to rejoice in his labor. This is the gift of God. For he shall not often reflect on the days of his life, because God occupies him with the joy of his heart. Then chapter 8, another refrain occurs. I think these are at the end of sections that are being discussed, and we'll loop back to this in some detail in the coming weeks. "Then I commended you, because a man has no better thing under the sun than to eat and to drink and to be joyful, for that will accompany him in his labor all the days of his life, which God has given him under the sun." And finally, in chapter 9, verses 7 to 10, now it changes to a form of a command. "Go your way, eat your bread with joy, drink your wine with a joyful heart, for God has already accepted your works. Let your garments be always white, and don't let your head lack oil. Live joyfully with the wife whom you love all the days of your transitory life," your vaporous life, "for that is your portion in life, and in your labor in which you labor under the sun. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might, for there is no work, nor device, nor knowledge, nor wisdom in Sheol, where you are going. So kind of put them in this order, in a circle, not how we do things in English, but this wasn't written in English. It wasn't written for Westerners who like lineal arguments, okay? So that's what we're going to be looking at. Now, just start sharing. What are some things you said you see repeated here? Not in any particular order. What do we got?
Eat.
Huh?
Eat.
Eat and drink. Okay, we like that one. All right. What else? Other words, concepts, things that are repeated.
Being joyful after the eating.
Being joyful, okay. Joy. What else? From God, okay. And gift of God. What else? Huh?
Enjoy your
Labor. Enjoy your labor. Okay, there are a number of things and concepts that repeat and string through here. I'm just going to put them up in some order, and then we're going to look at them just in some summary matter. Nothing better, we see recurring. Eat and drink, which you've mentioned. Joy, rejoice. Labor, portion or lot. Work, words, works, and we've looked at the work words already in some. To see or do or enjoy the good. God occupies or tasks, and we've looked at the task word before. And the gift of God, God gives. These are key concepts that have to do with the meaning of the book, which recur and show up in these refrains. First one I want to note is just nothing better. He says there's nothing better than you should eat and drink. There's nothing better, he says in the second. And in the third, therefore I saw that there's nothing better. In the fourth one, he says, I've seen it to be good and proper, which is a nothing better type of idea. And then we find it actually repeated in 8:15, there is no better thing. So he's making an evaluative judgment in these statements, isn't he? He's saying, there's nothing better to consider than what I'm saying here. All right. The next one is eat and drink. Eat and drink. And we find that again repeated regularly through here. It starts these refrains out. You've got it in the second refrain, you've got it in the fourth, and in the fifth, and in the sixth. So this is a key element, and we'll come back to this in just a word of explanation in a few minutes. The next one I want to point out is to command to see or do or enjoy the good. All right, and we'll look at that. Now, notice I've got the word better circled when we're looking at the word good. What is better? Better is a comparative adjective. What's it comparing? What comes before better when you're talking about something that's better and best? Good. Good, better, best. Well, the Hebrew word good occurs where it's translated better. We translated better. Hebrew didn't have a word comparative of good, better. They would use a negative with good and then the word than, not good than, and what they mean is better than. Okay, so that construction is here. So everywhere you see the word better, the Hebrew word good is involved in that phrase. Now, we shouldn't translate it that way. We should translate it the way it's translated. But the original hearers, when they were hearing this, would hear that good element repeated through here, and they would see it used in various ways. So I include it to show you that this word good is really, really important in these statements. Nothing is gooder than, all right? Okay, that's bad English, but that's the idea. To experience or to tell your soul to experience the good. The one who pleases him is the one who is good in his sight. And there again, in his face and his sight is added in the Hebrew, but in his presence is the way we should translate it in English. But just so you know that word occurs there in that context. So it's been used three different ways here in just the first few lines. So we see that in the end of that statement. We see in the second refrain, you've got better, good, and enjoy the good in his labor. In verse 12 of chapter 3, therefore I saw there is nothing better, gooder, And then we find in the fourth refrain, I have seen it to be good and proper. And then to eat, drink, and to see the good in his labor. We find it in chapter 8, nothing better. And then in chapter 9, where it says, go your way, eat your bread with joy, drink your wine with a good heart. And joyful heart is a perfectly acceptable translation. But just to see that this word good is really interwoven into these concepts, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And then, of course, joy, rejoice. We find that in a number of places. Sometimes, like for instance, in chapter 9, where it says, drink your wine, eat your bread, drink your wine with a joyful heart. That's not using the same word that this is. This is the word samak. We'll talk more about this word. It's the word that throughout the Old Testament is translated joy, joyful. And we shouldn't minimize that. But we can see that again in the concepts of rejoice as the verb and joy as the noun, that they occur regularly throughout these refrains. The word labor, that's and labor, remember, is the toil word. It's the word that creates the sweat when you're raking leaves or shoveling snow. Okay, so it's the toil word. And so we're commanded to do something about experiencing good in our labor. And in the second refrain, every man should eat, drink, and enjoy the good in his labor. Do you always enjoy toil?
Not always.
This is being commanded, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna have to think through that. So labor and earlier Solomon has said, there's something I hate about my labor. And this is, one of the negative parts of the book. He says, I may have to leave it to somebody who doesn't appreciate what it accomplished. Boy, that irritates me. Okay, well, he's not saying life is, joyless. He's just talking about the truths of labor and how we deal with it, how we experience it. So we'll have to deal with that. And then, of course, the other word is work word. This is the accomplishment word. This is what labor accomplishes, okay? What's your work? Well, I do this or this or this. I accomplish this, okay? There's labor involved in that. So we've got our work words. Now here you'll notice in the second refrain, rejoice and do good. Now, that's a perfectly valid English translation, but it uses the word work. Accomplish good. Now, that's a little different than doing, isn't it? So just, the Hebrew hearer would pick that up. In the third, he says a man should rejoice in his works, in his accomplishments. And then we find it again in the sixth refrain, again with God has already accepted your works. And in verse 10, whatever your hand finds to work, work it. It's literally what the Hebrew text says. Whatever your hand finds to do to accomplish, then accomplish it with your might. For there is no accomplishment or work, nor device, nor knowledge, nor wisdom in Sheol where you're going. Sheol just being the place of the dead, not termination of existence. So we see this word reoccurring, and we've already noted that these three work words are important. Another word that's not real prevalent, but it is important, is the idea of portion or lot. We find that in Numbers 3, 4, and 6. That a man should rejoice in his works, for that is his portion. And we're going to look at what that means here in a few minutes. We find it in the fourth one. This is his portion. And then every man to whom God has given riches and wealth and power to eat and to take his portion and to rejoice in his labor. And then we find this in chapter 9 where he says, that is your portion. If you do this, if you eat and drink and enjoy and live with your wife, this is going to be something for you in a positive sense. We'll come back to look at that. And then gift, the gift of God. God gives, and we find that regularly occurring throughout. This is from the hand of God. God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy, only to give to the one who is good in his sight, who pleases him. In the second refrain, he makes the statement after every man should eat and drink and enjoy good in all his labor, that this is the gift of God. Okay? In refrain 4, He says, it's proper and good to eat, drink, to see the goodness, labor, all the days of the life which God has given him. God has given us the days of our lives. Verse 19, every man to whom God has given riches and wealth, and the power to eat of it and rejoice, that's the gift of God. We're going to come back to that in particular. So this concept of God giving. And then the concept of task. This was the third word, okay? And we find it in just two places, but it's part of the whole thing. In the first refrain, he says, for to the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy, but to the sinner, he's given the business, the task of gathering and collecting only to give to the one who pleases God. That's a puzzling statement, isn't it? And then he says, this is vaporous and is striving after the wind. We'll come back to that. And then in the refrain 4, at the end of that, verse 20, for he shall not often reflect on the days of his life because God occupies him, busies him. That's that word we've looked at, with the joy of his heart. That's an interesting concept. We will come back to that. And then the idea of accountability, of fearing God. We note in kind of the extended statement here in the second refrain, I know that whatever God does shall be forever, that men should fear him. And God requires an account. There's a couple different ways to take that statement. But we mentioned this last week. Here it is, the fear of God in chapter 3, as part of the expectations of how to live in God's world. And then we find it in the concept of accountability in the refrain in chapter 9. God has accepted your works, and there would be some qualification for them to be acceptable. And it's not that any of these words, this is the only place they occur. I'm just showing you that they occur in critical places in these refrain statements. So what I want to do is develop a little more fully this first refrain, where he says, there's nothing better for a man than that he should eat and drink and cause his soul to experience good in his labor. So I want to think just a little bit, first of all, about this idea of eating and drinking. This is a metaphor. We're open the book with a metaphor, vapor. Everything is vaporous. Eating and drinking is a metaphor. Solomon isn't concerned with people starving to death. He's not concerned with dietary things. He's not saying eat this, don't eat that. He's saying eat and drink. And what he's doing is using the two activities that are absolutely essential to the continuation of physical life. If you don't eat and drink, your life ends. Well, he's not talking about physical life ending, but he's using this as a metaphor because it kind of encapsulates just the most basic qualities of life that give life possibility, that sustain you in whatever you're doing. So it's a metaphor about nourishing our beings. And since in this, he's talking about what's going on in our souls, what's going on in our hearts, what's going on in our minds, he's thinking about our non-physical lives, emotional, psychological, spiritual. So what he's saying is, as you move through life, partake of that which nourishes you in your inner being. Okay? So we're not going to get off into hedonism, eat, drink, and be merry. That's a metaphor too. Do whatever feels good at the moment because tomorrow you die. Okay? That's the Epicurean philosophy. And that's not at all in this book. Not at all. In fact, he uses the eat, drink in a completely different sense, right on face value. And so that's the first thing we need to get a hold of, is this is metaphorical of living with respect to the nature of your inner life, your inner being, your spiritual, emotional self. And that fits in with this idea that is translated soul, the Hebrew nephesh. We are not looking here at the Greek philosophical term for the seed and center of life that transcends the earthly, that is the dualistic body, soul, okay? Now, that's been imported into New Testament theology improperly, But that's a Greek idea, okay? This word is literally breath, not the same breath of vapor. Vapor is like a puff of air that you see. This is used in the creation accounts of men becoming living beings. So we're not thinking of the Greek philosophical term. What we're thinking of is breath or our various appetites, okay? Not physical appetites. He's not saying, eat watermelon and not something else, okay? That's not the appetites. And I'm quoting from Bruce Walke here in his study of this word that's in the Theological Word Book of the Old Testament. He says, since personal existence by its very nature involves drives, appetites, desires, and will, the nephesh, which is the Hebrew word here, translated soul, denotes the life of the individual, the living self with all its drives, not the abstract notion of life, okay? So that's what this word nephesh means. It means all of those appetites we have. It includes, for love, sex, enjoyment, fulfillment, just all of those non-physical things that keep us going, that motivate us, that get us up in the morning and go off to do things, whether it's work or something else. He would summarize this. He says the vitality, the passionate existence of an individual, hence passionate vitality. So that's how he kind of summarizes what this means, our passionate vitality, our vitality that comes from us pursuing the passions we have, okay? Now, we can illustrate it graphically better than verbally. This is a man in a coma in a hospital bed, okay? Now, if you visit somebody who's in a coma, they're hooked up to machines and it shows their heart's beating and their brain is working and so forth. Just assume the machines are there. He's in a coma. His eyes are closed, okay? Okay? Is he experiencing life? Depends on how you define life, okay? And here's a man, let's say it's the same man after he gets out of a coma, hiking up a mountain, okay? Is he enjoying life? Yeah, he's experiencing life, okay? Now, Hebrew has two different words that are translated life, the concept of life. The one is hayim, okay? That's not the word here. Both of these are alive, hayim, Hebrew hayim, okay? They're both living. The guy in a coma is living. He ain't experiencing much. In fact, he's not consciously, we know, experience anything. But he's living. He's alive. So that's the basic kind of physical definition of aliveness, okay? All right? But the word here, nephesh, is what he's experiencing. The guy in a coma is not really experiencing passionate vitality. His vitality is at a low ebb, okay? All right? Whereas the guy hiking the mountain, he's experiencing all kinds of stuff that would have to do with vitality. He's looking at the mountain, he's looking at the sky, he's listening to the birds, he's feeling the breeze, he's feeling the exertion and the exhilaration of climbing a mountain, okay? And if you're a hiker, a mountain climber, wow, that's exhilarating, okay? So this word has that idea, okay? So what's being said in this verse is that eat and drink, in other words, nourish yourself and your emotional, and make yourself experience what is good in your labor. That's the negative word, the toil. So he's connecting here work, the toil we do, with somehow that which enlivens us, that builds up our vitality, our passionate vitality. Get the point? So that's what's going on here. He's not just talking about being alive. He's talking about really living. There used to be an old beer commercial, a guy on a sailing ship says, you only go around once in life, so you got to what? Grab all the gusto you can get, all right? Gusto is what they're talking about. You got to go for the greatest enjoyment, emotional fulfillment you can get from life. So this guy was out sailing on his ship, okay? That's the idea. So just to work with this text a little more then, he says, there's nothing better for a man than that he should eat and drink and make his soul, and it's the form of the verb which is a causative. Do something to achieve this. It's not a passive thing. It's a reflexive inner thing. Now in chapters 3:13, 5:18, and 6:6, he just says, "See the good, see the good, behold it." In other words, look at life so that you really see the good that's going on there. So this means we got to think a little bit about this word "good." Okay, tov is a Hebrew word. It indicates a state or function that is appropriate to whatever it applies to. Okay, that can apply to various things. So it's a state which is appropriate. Appropriate from whose standpoint, do you suppose? God. Okay, from God's standpoint. And good, so good is whatever God expects in human behavior. Micah 6:8 is perhaps one of the most well-known verses capsulizing this. He has shown you, O man, what is good. And what does Yahweh require of you? That which is good. For example, act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. So that's good. And that's what the idea of good is here in all of these passages. Okay? What is gooder than this? What is more appropriate to the situation? Nothing. Eat and drink and see the good. So this is what we're looking at here, and just the idea of good. In Exodus chapters 33 and 34, Moses is wanting a vision of God, and he says, let me see your glory. And God says, well, I'll make my goodness pass before you. And then we have this thing in chapter 34, it's kind of the fulfillment of this request. And in chapter 34, it says, Yahweh passed before him and proclaimed, Yahweh, Yahweh, a merciful and gracious God, slow to anger, abundant in loving kindness and truth, keeping loving kindness to thousands and forgiving iniquity. That's his goodness. He proclaimed to him the nature of his being and the actions that he undertakes. So this is what he's saying here is that somehow in the most meaningful work that there is good to be seen. There is something that is appropriate to whatever situation you're in, to whatever work you're about, that from God's standpoint is there. It's to be beheld. It's to be experienced. Okay? Well, what's the big question from the way this is stated? How do I do this? This is something he says you need to do. Okay? Now, satisfaction. Yeah, it's the word good. And so satisfaction can be the outcome rather than the essence of something. So yeah, it's I think that's in the same realm. But you can be satisfied with the work and it not really be what God expects, can't you? So satisfaction is much more of a personal, and I think good it takes it more toward the absolute. Okay, I'm not disagreeing that satisfaction fits what we do, but the point is it's in your labor. So how do you do this? Let me ask it this way. You're a writer and you're wanting to get published, and somebody says, "Hey, I'll give you $1 million if you'll write a book on a self-help book on how to see the good, make you see the good in your labor." Okay? Can you come up with something? Can you come up with some steps? Sure you can. What would you say? Yeah, I can write a book on that for $1 million.
From a worldly
Yeah. From a standpoint of a publisher who wants to sell books, self-help books. Now, not writing to Christians, self-help books. What would they do?
Know yourself.
Know yourself.
Look inside.
Look inside to find out what works, what labors are more suited to you. All right.
How does it benefit the world around?
How does it benefit the world? Come up with ways that this is good, and therefore I can pat myself on the back. I'm doing something good for the world. What else would we add? Focus on being happy. Okay. Huh?
Know your truth.
Know your truth. Know your truth. Well, but specifically to labor. We've got to keep this to labor. There was
Be all that you can be.
Be all that you can be, all right, and all that you can do. What about those jobs that nobody loves? Every now and then you get behind a truck that's, they're cleaning sewers, septic tanks. What do you do with that job? Is that labor included here?
Yeah.
Somebody's got to do that job. Puts food on the table. So there are good things about it, okay? Good things about it, all right? You're giving me this awesome responsibility to, in my labor, see what is the appropriate thing to do from God's standpoint, okay? Now, we can all get real creative with things, but is God really leaving us up to that? So I want to explore that a little bit. There's nothing better for a man than he should eat and drink and make his soul, his nephesh, to experience good in his labor. This also I saw is from the hand of God. Okay, so somehow this is from the hand of God. Just as a command, or is it from him also in some other way? That's what we want to see. For apart from him, who can eat or enjoy everything? Now I have an asterisk there because there's good evidence that this is the way the verse should be translated instead of saying more than I. More than I, who can eat or enjoy anything. That's the way most versions will probably read, but some versions will have this as a footnote. And it has to do with some textual issues and various variant readings and so forth. And there are a lot of people who think this would be a better way to take it, and I think from the context they're probably right. For apart from him, who can eat or enjoy anything? Now, that's true, isn't it? Okay. He goes on to say, notice how he says this, for to the one who pleases, that is, to the one who is good in his presence, is literally what it says, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. Do you produce this joy? What does this text say? God gives this joy. Okay? Why does he give this joy? Because I'm doing what is good in his presence. All right? So he's tying it to a behavioral quality, not specifically to what he's doing in his labor. Okay? God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy, but to the sinner he gives the business of gathering and collecting only to give to one who pleases God. What does that mean? Well, I'm good. I please God, so I'm going to expect to knock on the door, and my sinner neighbor is going to come over and say, I had a bonus this year. God told me, give my bonus to you. Is that what it's talking about? No, that's not what it's talking about, okay? So how does this work? Who knows? Does it work? Is it true? It's true because it's in here, okay? It's inspired literature. I mean, have you ever had the experience of, something happened, some financial mishap, and all of a sudden God just provides you with this boon, okay? Where'd that come from? It came from him, but it came through somebody. Could it possibly have been directed from a sinner to you without you knowing about it? Oh, yeah. So when he says in this context, this also is vaporous and striving after wind, he's not talking about life is meaningless. He's saying, who in the world could ever understand how those two statements work out except God? Okay? This is vaporous. Can't get a hold of this. But that's what God led him to say, okay? That God has given wisdom and joy to the sinner, but the business of gathering and collecting only to give the one who pleases God. God is the one who directs all things material, okay? And sometimes we see his hand in it. Most of the time we don't, okay? But the point is, God's involved in it. The second refrain, I know that there's nothing better or gooder for them than to rejoice, to do good as long as they live. Also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy good, see the good in all his labor. It's the gift of God. That whole perspective of seeing labor as good is a gift that God gives. I know that whatever God does, it shall be forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken from it. And God has done it. Why? That people should fear in his presence, should fear him. That is, should just live in a deep, respectful being. That which is has been long ago. That which is to be has been long ago. And God seeks again or requires an accounting of that which passed away. God knows the past, present, and future. Okay, it's all there. I'm responsible to live in fear. And this I used last week just to kind of summarize what this idea of fear means. It basically is an attitude or a disposition toward God. I'm just in awe by all that he is. And that just threatens to undo me. But it draws me to him, doesn't repulse me from him. And it leads to appropriate behavior, but that behavior ultimately is not going to be something that I produce, but it's something that God does through me as I cooperate with him, as I believe him and act in trust and faith. So we've got this whole dynamic that centers around this idea of the fear of God, which results in actions and by God's enablement, and results in me becoming that or one whom God is pleased in. Okay? And so if I follow through in this dynamic that we talked about some last week, then God is going to reward me with the seeing of the good in my labor. And I may not be able to pinpoint it so that my unbelieving neighbor can say, oh, I can see why you don't mind doing this. That's not the point. God will give you the joy in your labor if you're living in the fear of him, that is, in faith and obedience to him. That's what's going on here, isn't it? So in chapter 5 and 18, the refrain 4, behold, that which I have seen to be good and proper is for one to eat and to drink and to enjoy good in all his labor, in which he labors under the sun all the days of his life, which God has given him, for this is his portion. I want to look at this word portion. Every man also to whom God has given riches and wealth, and has given him power to eat of it, and to take his portion, and to rejoice in his labor, this is the gift of God. Ultimately, this joy and this satisfaction and this exultation and even the most menial things that God gives us to do is something that he produces in our hearts when we're rightly oriented to him, rightly aligned with him. Okay, so this idea of portion, this is what when Israel went into the land, it was apportioned, and the tribes each got their portion. And then in the family, the firstborn would get a double portion. So it was kind of the idea of an inheritance, but it's also has a present aspect. So it was divided among the victors in a conflict. It was a share in an inheritance, a share of the land given to the tribes of Israel, except for the Levites. The Levites didn't get any. And what does the Bible say was their portion? The Lord. The Lord was their portion. So for Aaron and Levites, the Lord was their portion. What does that mean? What does that mean? Well, it goes on to apply this concept to other situations in the Old Testament. Psalm 16 is a psalm about the Messiah and what he's thinking and saying and doing. O Lord, you are the portion of my inheritance and my cup. You maintain my lot, my portion. And so here's a statement from a dictionary of Old Testament theology on this word that's translated portion. It says, this relationship with God and people was defined in a spiritual concept. The Lord is my share, Psalm 73:26. The Lord is the portion of his people, Deuteronomy 7:9. Just as he is their refuge, Psalm 142:5, and so their sufficiency. The Levites, and by extension the God-fearer, find here, in the words of Gerhard von Rad, find here a full and complete expression of all that his relationship with God guarantees him. My relationship with God. When I am pleasing in his sight, when I am doing what is expected in his sight, he gives me the joy of my heart. He gives me the joy of my heart. So what we find is that God, in these passages, for instance in 5:18, that God grants us the days of our lives. Every day is a gift of his, from him to us. He gives us the jobs in which we labor and toil, whether they're pleasant in themselves or not. He gives the immediate outcomes of those labors. The works or the accomplishments are ultimately what God has enabled us to do and to perform. And he gives us, according to this, the power or the authority to enjoy them. Notice what it says, every man also to whom God has given riches and wealth, and has given the power to eat of it, and to take his portion, and to rejoice in his labor, these are all the gift of God. I can't produce it by telling myself, well, this is a needy work. It is, and I can have that attitude, but ultimately it's God who gives me the joy in my labor. When I'm walking in such a way that I'm looking to him, depending on him, okay? Now notice this. This just knocks our socks off. For he shall not often reflect on the days of his life. That is the person here. Not going to sit around and say, oh, man, this is a drag. Do I have to go through this again? Why? Because God occupies him with the joy of his heart. See, this joy is a supernatural gift that God bestows to us if we are simply living in the light of who he is and taking life as a good gift with all of its vagaries, with all of its inconsistencies, with all of its problems, with all of its injustices, with everything that can go wrong from a human standpoint. It's still a gift. And he is there to enliven our hearts with joy and appreciation if we but honor him, if we but seek to do in each moment what is appropriate to who I am as his child. Doing it by his strength, doing it unto him, doing it in faith. It's a partnership of dependence. And when that happens, I don't produce the joy. I don't make myself happy. God does it. And look at that. He won't often reflect on the days of his life because God occupies him with the joy of his heart. So Solomon in chapter 1, when he says, I looked at my labor and I looked at the fact that somebody might inherit who just will mess it up, and I hated life. Absolutely, totally, no. In that respect, he said, boy, that's really an aggravating part of life. But then he goes on to write this. So obviously, he's not stuck in the pessimism, so-called, of this book. He is frustrated by the reality of what life often hands to us and what we often experience. But he knows there's something much bigger going on. It's God who has gifted us with life. It's God who is there to cause us to see. He's the one who causes us to see the good, to appreciate the appropriateness of all that's going on. Not through my understanding, but through faith. Faith in him is the giver of good gifts. That's what he gives. That's the only kind of gifts he gives, good gifts. And the product in my life is joy, rejoicing. Okay, not by my manufacturing some big worthy thing that this is going to accomplish. Doesn't have to be. It's just by trusting him, because he's the one who's the giver of life in all those ways. So that's how this middle part is traced all the way through. And so what I'm basically reacting to in my opening example was not just kind of the overall tech of the book, but the fact that, it's negative and all of a sudden at the end he drops in positive. It's not. This is all the way through, isn't it? And so hopefully in my barraging you with all of those statements, you kind of see that all these things are going on and they're repeating in cycles. And we'll come back as we start to develop the book in sections, and I'm still doing kind of some overview things, and see how each one of these refrains fits into the context that just precedes it, and see how it is that Solomon is developing this. So that's where I wanted to go with it today. Again, is I don't know if this is the final overview lesson, but this is where we're going to end today.